Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now on our 40th episode of 2025. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast. The Fiber Broadband Association has held its most recent Regional Fiber Connect workshop in Spokane a few weeks ago, and I am looking forward to our next regional event. Will be in Scottsdale on October 16th. This one's going to be focused on travel broadband, among other fiber-related topics. After Scottsdale, we'll be in Kansas City in November 11th, and then we'll end the year at our premier member meeting in Palm Springs on December 8th and 9th. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is Dr. William Aderholdt, the Executive Director and co-founder of Grand Farms, discuss the future of agriculture grows on fiber. Before I formally introduce today's guests, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor, Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, as participants, you are in listen-only mode. However, we want to keep this interactive. To ask a question, please type it into the question box, which is located in the lower left-hand side of your screen. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on the FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours, and you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. Finally, at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to respond. We appreciate your input. With that, I will hand things back over to Gary to get us started. Gary?
Thanks, David. Good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest was Tom Camber, the Older Adults Technology Services Director from AARP, discuss why fiber is essential to enable older adults to age in place. You know, my dad just turned 90 this past summer, and, they enjoy being able to stay in their home and play golf every day, and, being able to have fiber connectivity to stay connected and be able to live in their own home and be able to age in place is critically important. So if you missed last week's session, please go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is Dr. William Aderholdt, the Executive Director and co-founder of Grand Farm, discuss the future of agriculture grows on fiber. Dr. William Aderholdt is the Executive Director and co-founder of Grand Farm, a nonprofit organization energizing and guiding an innovation ecosystem to solve challenges in agriculture. William joined Grand Farm in 2019 as it was getting started and was the first hire of this initiative. He's helped develop and establish the strategic vision and programs that he has now had the opportunity to lead through immense effort of an extremely talented team. Grand Farms, providing a fresh approach to innovation ecosystems, has been the lead, co-lead, and a consortium member on many of the economic resiliency federal programs established in response to COVID-19, including NSF, Engine Type 2, EDA Good Jobs Challenge, and EDA Tech Hubs. It has nearly 600-acre innovation campus in Castellon, North Dakota, where the initiative is headquartered, and the teams are starting in Georgia and Montana. William and his wife, Lana, and their two children call Fargo, North Dakota home. Dr. Aderholdt earned both his PhD and Master's in Education and a BS in Cell Biology and Neuroscience from Montana State University. So welcome, Dr. Aderholdt. And for our audience, please type in your questions as we go, and we'll work them into discussion. With that, let's get things started. I'll turn things over to you. I think you have a few slides to show about Grand Farm.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on today to share about what we're doing. As was mentioned by Gary in the introduction, Grand Farm started in 2019, and there was a question asked at the time in our community, if we had to choose a major, what would that be? And we brought together steering committee members, leaders from throughout the region to talk about that. It became very clear that agriculture technology was that major. We have a flourishing technology ecosystem throughout Fargo, North Dakota, and a rich history and tradition in agriculture in North Dakota throughout. And so when we got started, we began to look at how can you take the problems and opportunities that exist in agriculture and begin to expose them to innovators from around the world to solve these challenges, bring people together on a test bed to accelerate innovation. One of the first things we began talking about, one of the first topics we became known for talking about was actually last mile and last acre connectivity. Grand Farm, there's a time and place behind it. 2019 is when you started to see a lot of the conversation around artificial intelligence and autonomy really begin to flare up, especially in rural communities and agriculture. Agriculture being one of the last industries to bring forward this technology was being enabled by a lot of the federal investments and engagement in connectivity space. And so today, as I talk about Grand Farm, I'll continue to try to bring that home and talk about why fiber has been important and why connectivity is important, not just in the history of Grand Farm, but even more so in the future of it. So as we look at what Grand Farm's doing, we are a collaborative network, and we believe by bringing people together and relationships together, you accelerate progress, you accelerate innovation. The reality is a lot of technology that we talk about in agriculture and around the world, there's an inevitability to it. Things will move forward. What there is not an inevitability to is groups like this coming together today and talking about how it should move forward and how people should be involved in the conversation. We do the same thing at Grand Farm. We bring together growers, startups, corporations, government, investors, and researchers almost every single day to talk about what are they working on and how can they work towards solving opportunities and challenges in agriculture. What are the barriers that exist and how can we remove those barriers through assets like the Grand Farm Innovation Campus? We work with 2,500 organizations from around the world in our work. We have an ecosystem of that many. 500 of those are startups. But we have a partnership group of 75 core partners who are engaging on a day-to-day basis in our work. And these ones are people who are deeply integrated in what we're doing. And it includes institutions like North Dakota State University and University of Georgia, larger initiatives like we described earlier with National Science Foundation Agriculture Technology Engine in North Dakota, as well as the Headwaters Tech Hub, and groups like Microsoft who are bringing forward this technology that is being exposed into agriculture. We have partners who are involved in the connectivity space like Dakota Carrier Network, who has brought together much of the connectivity across North Dakota and helped advance the conversation around agriculture, last mile, and last acre connectivity. To do our work, we have this innovation framework. And I think it's important to talk through this a little bit. And I'll spend a little bit more time on this slide because it'll help kind of curtail the rest of the conversation. We start by identifying challenges. I mentioned that a lot. Why is that important? You have to engage growers and users in the conversation at the beginning to understand what do they need to see accomplished in their own work. Everything in agriculture, just like any other industry, is a business decision. While businesses do build themselves on culture and values, it also is around financial health. And so all those things get taken together as you look at how these problems are emerging. It might be workforce and understanding how decreasing populations in rural communities is impacting the ability to find farm labor at really key times. Or it's looking at things like farm safety and finding ways to make farms a safer environment. It could be more emerging trends, like how do you solve herbicide-resistant weeds that are impacting our ability to grow food efficiently? And so what we do is we go out to growers and organizations every single year, and we talk to them, and we try to understand what those challenges and opportunities are. And we do this by region. And why is that important? It's just like connectivity. Every region has its own unique constraints and opportunities to move forward with. In agriculture, you have different soil types, you have different growing practices, you have different equipment, different crops. And you're looking at how those differences have also created unique differences and challenges to address. And then you talk to a grower about those. Hey, you have this weed that's emerging. Why is it emerging? How are you dealing with that today? How do you wish you were dealing with it? With all that information, all that intelligence, we pulled together this regional agriculture pain point report. Now, this year, that pain point report was a distillation of 65 major trends in agriculture, representing 25,000 growers. Then we took the step two and exposed that to this innovation ecosystem, those 2,500 organizations I mentioned. We shot that out around the world, and then we begin to attract those innovators to each of these regions. So we go out and we meet with these people. We meet with companies in Japan, we meet with companies on the coasts, we meet with companies in the Midwest, we meet with growers with amazing ideas on how to solve these and are just looking at how do they start their own startup. We begin to share what is the problems, how do they exist, how are they currently managed that the growers helped us think through. We share the economic impact, but also the economic opportunity. We talk about the infrastructure that is in place that they're able to utilize, like connectivity. We talk about what the wide access of connectivity means when you bring forward a solution. And the reason why we do this is because not everyone has had the privilege of engaging with a grower in their day-to-day space, but they may have ideas on how to help. We want them to be informed when they do that, and we also want them to be attracted to the idea of solving those things. By sharing that economic opportunity, they are more likely to see what it means for them, just like a grower can see what it means for them when it's solved. And the last piece, and I mentioned barriers before, but the removing of barriers is so important to our work. We have a 600-acre test bed. And the reason why we do that is because we believe that's necessary to accelerating innovation. It is very difficult for a startup, who may not have a fully scaled product to go out and find agriculture land and have the agriculture expertise to install something, and then run an entire plot of corn, for instance, and then have the connectivity in place that's reliable, and the connectivity technicians, the people who actually can connect their sensor to the LoRaWAN, for instance, that's connected to the fiber to execute that project. We remove all those barriers. We make it really easy for a startup to come in and test something out. And what happens when they're testing something out in our environment is they're meeting each other. And they're meeting companies that are interested in the work that they're doing and investors. And they're getting direct feedback from growers who are visiting the site, or politicians who need to learn more about why they're doing what they're doing and what it means for them. And so all those are important to actually moving these things forward. So an example, we have case studies that we like to share. This is one that I've talked a lot about as we look at different sensors. And sensors are just one type of technology, but in working with USDA's Agricultural Research Service in Lincoln, Nebraska, we've been looking at ways to modernize their data capture. So typically, researchers will still use ground truth methods, going out and taking a soil sample, and then taking that sample and then analyzing it, and then it takes time to get the results back. And you can imagine in a production setting where a farmer is doing that, 2 weeks to a business decision is too long. Everything we're doing these days is how do you get instantaneous intelligence to make a decision? That's the same for researchers. And so they're finding ways to implement these sensors in the field. This one on the screen is called Soil Tech. What's awesome about the sensor is that it utilizes last acre connectivity to penetrate the soil, and you plant these things with potatoes. And it's collecting information next to the potatoes that drives the ability for farmers to make smart decisions. In this case, it's for researchers as well in terms of how we're using it for this study. And so when we're working with a company like Soil Tech or USDA Agricultural Research Service, we think a lot about technology readiness levels. We want to see a movement forward. And so with this study, we're providing real-time feedback to the founder of this company, Hassan, and sharing about what we're seeing. And when he's coming up with new ideas on how to implement things or new ways to install or utilize these sensors, we're right there with him, helping his organization test them out in real time. And so we become partners with both the group that's looking to utilize the sensor, like a grower or the Agricultural Research Service, as well as those creating them. And that just has really helped accelerate innovation in agriculture. And it's not just sensors. We work in autonomy, robotics, drones. Those are more of those digital assets. We work in heavy equipment that utilizes connectivity. We also work in things like biologics, which are helping to decrease the need, as much fertilizer need, or being able to increase the regenerative nature of the soil to increase other health benefits to the crop that can increase yield, business, as well as or yield, return on investment, as well as other aspects. And so this whole entire environment creates an entire ecosystem of thought leadership, the ability to ping pong ideas off of each other and drive things forward. Grand Farm in this whole equation is a neutral, independent platform. We do not keep or share an IP. We give it all away. And as a nonprofit, we want to make sure that we are able to drive these conversations forward. And I think that's why so many organizations have partnered with us to date.
Well, Dr. Aderholdt, super interesting. Before we kind of dig into Grand Farm, maybe just start off with, you're a Montana guy. My dad grew up in Montana. How the heck did you guys end up in Fargo, North Dakota?
Well, originally I'm from San Diego. And I moved up to Montana, joined the National Guard. And as soon as I got out of basic training, a Montana woman found me, and we got married 4 years later. And she's got a farm in eastern Montana. From my educational background, you'll see I was cell biology and neuroscience, and it switched over to sociology or education. With that, I became very enamored by what rural community meant. I really fell in love with agriculture. And so going out to the farm regularly, helping out, and then talking to people in the community is why I'm doing what I'm doing today. And so when we were deciding on what we do after our education, moving over to North Dakota just made a lot of sense. It was still rural. It still had proximity to the farm, so we could continue to go back as we do now. But we're also keeping us engaged in the conversation. She got a job with John Deere, which I talked about that technology ecosystem. John Deere has this intelligence solutions group in Fargo, North Dakota, where they build a lot of this advanced technology. And so that's what kind of drew me into what we're doing today.
Yeah, John Deere is amazing. I mean, they send you parts before you know your tractor's broken. So they have their technology is very innovative, and that's kind of like the golden standard, I guess, in innovation in farming. So super interesting. So when I think of Grand Farm, so this is just really a test bed. What you created is a test bed for technology innovation in agriculture. So anybody that has an idea calls you up and says, I got a sensor, I have some technology, and you guys provide a space for them, an opportunity for them to come in and test it out and see how that works. Is that the basic?
Yeah, I mean, I would describe it as a relational test bed. You're getting both those connections that help drive a business forward, as well as the opportunity to move technology towards adoption.
So what is the end game? I mean, this was largely funded initially out of the state, right? You got some federal funding, but I mean, your state legislature wrote a big check. And so I'm assuming that the state is looking for a certain outcome.
Yeah, so I'd love to talk about kind of how we're structured and where that moved forward. So we did receive $10 million from the state of North Dakota with some economic diversification resiliency dollars out of the American Rescue Plan Act. That was legislatively directed by the state. Private industry matched that with another $5.3 million. What I would say is every single day, we're driving home economic impact into the state. And what that looks like is we've had 20 companies relocate to North Dakota because of this work. They have brought the workforce needs. We've helped evolve and transform the workforce to match the AgTech needs of the region. But the state, I think, also sees the vision expanding beyond just the geographic borders. We see ourselves as not being geographically bound, even though we're headquarters here. And the state has given us that freedom. And so we have expanded into Georgia. We have been doing considerable work in Montana. One of our strongest partners, if not the strongest, is the United States Department of Agriculture, where they also don't have a geographic constraint within the United States. So we operate hand in hand with their researchers and their leaders, helping to advance technology solutions into these different challenges.
So from your organizational structure, do you have a board of directors, and is there certain metrics that they're looking to, I mean, how are you measuring your success?
Absolutely. So we do have a board of directors. I think we're really early right now. And so as we're looking at success, every single day we're working with our community to understand what that means. And our community being broader than maybe just the regional community, but the ecosystem. One of the things that I say positively haunts me is how do we create positive value for those around us? As I think about the impact we've been able to make to date, having conversations like this one, or engaging with the FCC, or presenting to the FCC Precision Ag Task Force a couple of times now, we're able to expose what's happening around the world. A lot of what we do that relates to their work, a lot of what we do, I say, has intangible value. It is so hard to measure because we're working in that relationship space. It's very difficult to say we have directly impacted a startup who's raised $25 million, even though we've had 80 engagements with them, because at the same time, they do their own work. And so we're constantly finding ways to do what you're saying is measuring values. 20 relocations. I believe we're at nearly 100 jobs created. We've seen investments from the federal government into our work, upwards of about $300 million for our peers, not just our own work, but groups that we've been able to help support through their grant processes or federal contracts. And so those are metrics that we look at, and we're continuing to find ways, whether it's through expansion and others, to widen the impact and scale it.
You know, farming is definitely a challenging business, to say the least. And my parents had an apple orchard, apples and pears, and, you know, just weather events. And, you know, is it raining when you want bees to pollinate? And, you know, when you have a great crop, everybody else does, and the prices, you know, so you're dealing with, you know, the market dynamics, as well as all kinds of weather events and other things outside of your control. You know, as we have a precision ag committee at Fiber Broadband Association, and, you know, we bring in speakers from IBM, Orlando Lakes, and others. You know, they talk about farms now with digital twins, and, you know, being able to, when you look at these heat maps on, you know, just on moisture content of how you can be off a foot or so on, you know, your when your irrigation systems and so forth can really determine, you know, the yield of your crops. You know, just making sure you get your fertilizer in all the right, you know, you're not wasting fertilizers, getting all the right spot. You're not wasting your irrigation, it's getting in all the right spots. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, some of the things that you guys are working on, and is that along the lines of things you're optimizing?
I think those are absolutely areas that we have been involved in the conversation and continuing to make impact. So we have 61 current organizations that we're engaged with in test plot work and test trial work. A lot are in what I'm hearing you describe, either in remote sensing, actually doing something with the information you just pulled off the site and helping to drive decisions. All that's tied into connectivity space. So every single day, this promise of artificial intelligence is beginning to emerge in agriculture. And we are looking at how do you take a drone or in-ground sensor like I showed earlier, or a satellite, how are we pulling information off the crops in the soil? How are we putting that information into a very consumable way for a grower and empowering them with tools, equipment, robotics that can actually help them do something with that information, that decision-making criteria that they have. So when they know they want to do something, they can do it. And so whether it's adjusting your pivot irrigation because you know how much soil moisture is in the soil. That's a project we're working on through the North Dakota Agriculture Technology Engine from National Science Foundation, for instance. Or if you're looking at how do you find where a very invasive weed species is, which is something we're working on with the North Dakota Department of Agriculture, those are all empowered by this technology. And those are all things extremely relevant to farmers.
So that kind of brings us to broadband. I mean, all this connectivity, even, the tractors got to talk to John Deere and all that kind of stuff. How important is it to get fiber to the farm?
Absolutely important. And I would say this is where the solutions, if you're a innovator, you innovate to what your constraints are. You need to understand those. So just like understanding how a farmer addresses weeds, you need to know what connectivity solutions are in a space, and that becomes your parameters, or what will be. And so I can't design new tools if I don't believe that connectivity is going to be there. And so the forward-thinking investment in connectivity infrastructure at the last mile space has set the foundation for the United States and beyond's agriculture production to reap the benefits of this technology. It needed to be ahead of the change. It needed to be ahead of the technology. Now, a lot of the conversation that I'm a part of is both in how do you maintain and continue to invest in infrastructure, but how do you start to look at last acre connectivity and take something from the edge of the farm and distribute it across the entire farm? So you have fiber at the edge, but what tools do you have to get it everywhere so that you can find all that data you described earlier to make those important decisions? And so we're looking at things like Wi-Fi, LoRaWAN, LoRa, CBRS, and things like that can help distribute that and deal with the scalability.
So you mentioned pain report. What are the top 3 pain points that you guys are seeing from your pain report?
Yeah, absolutely. So pest management is right now the number one. And so with that, that is where weeds come in. So weeds are a massive challenge right now. There's a challenge around herbicide resistance, and a lot of it is how do you detect herbicide-resistant weeds, and then how do you use things like robotics to destroy them? Because chemical applications are becoming more challenged to solve those challenges. The other one that's really prevalent in today's, if you're watching the news, is something called screwworm. And so these are things that are impacting animal agriculture. Again, a lot of the tools and techniques are using that connectivity to identify, detect, and destroy the flies that carry that are screwworm. As we look at like equipment, it's how do we continue to drive forward the development of equipment to keep the costs low enough that farmers can work within their margins to acquire it and adopt it, is another one. The last one is really, it's a really unique challenge to artificial intelligence. It's called site-specific context. And so if I'm working on pivot irrigation on my farm and I've collected all this data and I've built these amazing models for my farm, it may not work on the neighbor's farm because they're doing agriculture different. And the microclimate differences between your farm and my farm are that different. And so finding ways to help create models that are accurate while also not having to just collect information about every farm and every place to retrain models all the time is a pretty significant challenge. And a lot of that has to do with our GIS tools that are available to us today and how those work in rural spaces.
Well, Dr. Alda William, I'm having a hard time here.
William, good.
No, I really appreciate you sharing the work that you guys are doing on Grand Farm. You're having to feed the world. It's going to become a much more difficult job as the number of farms shrink and the number of people we need to feed greatly increases. So, precision agriculture in producing yield and efficiency is paramount. So thank you for all the great work you and your team are doing. And if there's anything we can do on the technology side, hopefully you can, I'll give you information on our precision ag working group. I would love for you to be a part of that. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today and look forward to getting back together next Wednesday. Our good friend Brian Darr from Ookla will be with us, and he has his latest data on all the Ookla data they collect on broadband and what's all that going to mean to you. So let's see what Brian has to say next week. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Aderholdt, and I will look forward to reading your pain report.